Welcome back to the last session of the Innovative in Analytics Awards that is sponsored by Caterpillar and the Analytics Society. So we have our last two teams. So I'm not gonna waste their time because we have 20 minutes for presentations, 5 minutes for questions. The questions will be given by the judges. So if you have questions for any of these teams, you can ask them after we finish. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Karen Smilowitz, and I'm representing our joint team of Northwestern University and the Bank of America Chicago Marathon. And I have my teammates, Chris Rizolas, Gabriel Caniglia, and Charlie Collar with me. I want to thank Juan and the committee. It's been really exciting today to see the other finalists, although I have to say, presenting safe when you already saw safer. We thought about adding an ST, like a super terrific at the end, but we're going to go with what we have. So I'm here to present situational awareness for events. So this, as I said, is a partnership with the Chicago Marathon. And so when we started this partnership about a little over 5 years ago, we asked two questions. What does it mean to visualize a marathon? And why is it important to visualize a marathon? And so I hope our name is indicative of why we want to answer these questions. We're really looking at safety, public safety, and the entire participant event experience. So what I'm going to present today, and at the end you'll have a chance to participate in Forward Command. We will show you the 2017 Chicago Marathon in 2 minutes. We're going to show you an overview of our system. So this is our comprehensive data visualization system for mass endurance events and mass participation events in general. We're going to use descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics to look at both pre-event decisions and race day decisions. I mentioned that we're doing this in partner with the Chicago Marathon. We're also working with the Houston Marathon and many of their public safety partners as well. So let me tell you a little bit about the marathon in Chicago. We are the second largest marathon in the world with approximately 45,000 runners and an estimated 1.7 million spectators. The other very notable fact about Chicago is that within a 5 to 7 hour period, we're seeing between 1,000 and 2,000 patients. That is quite a bit. And the way that this is handled is with a team of over 1,400 medical volunteers. So if it takes a village to raise a child, we say it takes a city to run a marathon. So let me tell you a little bit about how that's done. So in 2007, you may have heard that the Chicago Marathon was canceled mid-race. So mid-race, I said 45,000 runners, 1.7 million spectators, spread out over 26.2 miles. So the logistics of canceling a race in the middle of the race is significant. And so, what they did after that, so this was 2007, in 2008 they created what's known as the Chicago model. So borrowing from FEMA and their incident command structure, the idea is to bring everyone together, both physically and organizationally, bring everyone together to manage the event, to plan the event, manage the event on race day. So what you're seeing is incident command, known as Forward Command. I'll use different names because different marathons use different names. This is a tent in Grant Park. For those of you who've been to Chicago, been to the marathon, both the start line and the finish line are centered around Grant Park. And so this massive tent brings together all of the major agencies involved in the organization. So in the front, you'll see some of the marathon folks, but you'll also see, back there you can see CPD, Chicago Fire Department, you'll see Office of Emergency Management, the Red Cross is in there, the ham radio operators play a very big role in the marathon. So the idea is bring everyone together. So when decision making needs to occur, everyone's in the same place. Now what we do is we bring data visualization to that. And so for security reasons, we can't take a ton of pictures in Forward Command, so this is the best picture I can get you to really get a sense of what our system is like when it's being used. So if you look over here, this is our system on the course op side. So this is where a lot of the organizers from Chicago are working. On the other side back here, you kind of flip it on the other side of the screen, is what the public agencies are seeing. So Chicago Police is back there, Office of Emergency Management, and they're also using our system. So what our system has done is it's really given everyone a better sense of situational awareness. It's really become a go-to place to look for information. So this is a quote from George Champus, who is the medical director of the Chicago Marathon and one of our partners in developing SAFE. So a little history of the evolution of the system. This is what data visualization looked like prior to our project in the Chicago Marathon. This is a whiteboard that's telling you where all of the runners are to some extent. This is our first system. So in the 2014 Chicago Marathon, this is what we deployed, and I'll talk about it in a minute. And this is our system as it was shown in Newsweek in 2016. So you can see how far we came. This is also an article that appeared in Runner's World where the very sweet author really wanted to make it a story about a runner doing this. And I ran one marathon once, and it was many, many years ago. But I want to talk today, and Chris is going to help me, about some of the key enhancements to the system. The most important enhancement, and this is where analytics has really played a strong role, is in the simulation. So if you look over here in the old map, prior to when we started, the way that they would look at runner density is, any of you run marathons, you know you've had a chip in your bib or in your shoe, and you cross a mat every 5 kilometers. Sound vaguely familiar? So every 5 kilometers, every 10 minutes, they would count runners. And so then they would look at how many runners passed here and how many runners passed at this 5K, and then just do simple interpolation between the 2 points. I mean, literally just uniformly distributing the runners. And so the first time we did the system, that's what we displayed. It's very clunky as you go along, and it's not very accurate. So as Chris is going to talk about, we actually know something about these runners, and we can do a better job. Why is that important? Because what they want to know is, when can I open the streets? And also, if there's an emergency, they're going to use the aid stations as emergency shelters, where everyone's going to shelter in place. And so what Mike Nishi, who runs the Chicago Marathon, one of the organizers, said to us is, I want to know at those aid stations, at every mile, how many runners have passed. And so what our simulation does, and like I said, Chris will tell you more details, is in many large races, runners are released in what's known as corrals. So it's basically a group of runners who are roughly the same pace. So if you're starting the runners in corrals, you could look at the race at any time, and you should be able to know how fast they're running and where they are. And so that's the basis of our simulation. The other big changes that we made are on the back end. 4 big areas. One was in data security, access to the system, different user levels. Another was in data entry, so to the extent that we can, automating the feeds into the system. The third was on efficiency of our overall code. This first system was just really slow. It took a long time to update. And then the fourth, and this is really also important for the analytics, is on data archiving. So being able to maintain all of the information that we're collecting. And so, as I said, the initial idea was every mile we want to know where the runners are. So this was our initial goal, and then Chris will talk about how we met that goal. He's also going to talk about another point, which is how did we start to use this for planning? Right? So the Houston Marathon, another partner that we worked with, said, well, can't we use your simulation to think about how we do the start line release, so then we know how crowded we are at the finish line? And so Chris will talk about some of that.
Thank you, Karen. So, key factors that influence marathon speed. For me, that would be how loudly my parents are cheering my name, but probably not statistically significant for most runners. So, we take a look at corral grouping, as Karen mentioned, because runners are grouped based on an expected pace, so we would anticipate that as they move on course, we would know where they would end up on course when they started the race, because they're running at a 3.5-hour pace, 4.5-hour, etc. But we have to be cautious with this, because the start line procedure is not always consistent, and it's for no one's fault, but data and variability itself. So what we're looking at here is a start line release procedure for runners. So each individual point on this plot is an actual runner from a marathon. Now on the x-axis we have their runner bib number, which is also an analog for their corral. So they're assigned numbers based on whether or not they're an elite runner or someone who's going to run at an 8-hour pace. And along the y-axis, we see the minute since the start of the race in which they were actually released onto the course and they started their own marathon. Now the white lines are what was the planned corral start time. And what you'll see in some instances is that the corrals just did not start when they were planned to. And it's okay, it happens. But what you'll also see is that there's a variability in spread of when runners within a corral actually do start themselves. The elite runners in the bottom left start in a very small 30-second window. They're all running quick, they all know what they're doing. But when you get to that giant orange clump, runners that are all the way down in Corral G are starting across multiple minutes. Some of them even start not even within their corral. And so we have to take this into account when we consider variability and runner speed on course and how we choose to simulate them. Now, runner progression on course is another key factor. And most runners, I can't say all because it might be possible, but most runners can't run a marathon at the exact same speed for all 26.2 miles. I know I couldn't. But we do know that they slow down on course. So the further you get into a marathon, the slower you're going to get. Nothing shocking. It's intuitive. And the other course conditions we know that we found intuitive are that weather will impact your race. So we see humidity and temperature as two key factors, with humidity starting high at the beginning of the day and dropping, and temperature inversely starting low and increasing. Now, interestingly, we found that in instances where the temperature does not necessarily increase throughout a race day, we will see runners see this as ideal conditions. And in ideal conditions, you'll actually find more musculoskeletal injuries occur on course and are reported at aid stations. Why? Runners say, hey, this is ideal. I'm going to push myself. I want to qualify for Boston. And coincidentally, if you want to see an example of the non-ideal race conditions, you could look at yesterday's Boston Marathon, which, if some of you haven't heard, was the slowest Boston Marathon in the past 2 decades, which would be a direct result of the inclement weather of very cold and very rainy. So I can't physically run a marathon in 45 seconds. You could probably guess that. Computationally, I can. And so we take those key factors and we have a multiple regression model that's built to predict runner speed. And that is also met with race day inputs. So we talk to the office, the Chicago event management. They tell us how they're going to actually start on the course, how the corrals are going to be assigned. We know whether or not runners showed up and picked up their packets. And we know the actual day of weather forecast that are the anticipated in the tent, what they are telling us what the weather is going to be. Now those meet within our simulation. And it's programmed in Python, and it's mapped so that a Python object represents 5 real runners. And the reason we don't do actually 45,000 runners and 45,000 objects is so that we can simulate faster during the race if we need to. And within the simulation, there's dynamically updating weather, speeds, and runner dropouts throughout the simulated race to make sure we're accounting for all the factors we can think of that might impact runner course densities. And those runner course densities are what's output, which is for every single minute of the race, at every single mile segment, all 26.2, we have a prediction of how many runners are going to be there. So if you ask me minute 37, I can tell you exactly at mile 17 how many people we expect to be there. Now, simulation in nature is driven by variability, but so is reality. And so during the race itself, we actually do real-time monitoring. And so there are GPS units on pacers, and we track those live to make sure our elite runners, who are expected to have a pace of about 2 hours and 5 minutes, are actually running at that pace. We check 5K mats, which are coming in at a 5K level, which is about 3 miles, and we want that 1 mile level. And then we also check weather to see whether or not we were correct. So during the race, we can actually resimulate with that 45-second time and either increase our size of population. So if we have more runners show up than we expected, we can decrease it. But we can also change their speeds. So if in general the runners are going slower, like Boston yesterday, we would be able to resimulate our anticipated runners at the event while we were actually seeing it happen live. Now, Karen always quotes to us as a team from Uncle Ben from Spider-Man that with great power comes great responsibility, and it could not be more true. So our system, SAFE, has become integral to the Chicago model. And it is so integral that it's relied on, and people will look at it all day in the tent. They'll walk by and say, I like that, or what's that number? And they want to know, and they believe it. And so that's why accuracy matters for us. So in the past fall, 2017 Chicago Marathon, we monitored throughout the race with those live monitoring factors I mentioned. And we found that at any single point in those 10-minute intervals we were monitoring, we were only off by 3.5% of the population. So what that means is that at any given point, I could tell you confidently where 96.5% of our runner population was. And in the event of emergency, or even for the event of course medical planning, that's a pretty good number, so they have an idea of how many runners are going to come past them and how many runners have been there. And so by the end of that race, we were only off by 30 runners about who we expected to be at the finish line at that point in time during the day. That's 30 runners out of 45,000 runners. We felt pretty good about that number. So our most recent deployment happened then at Houston in this past January, and we also felt like we saw pretty good results and we're happy with how it's going. And it's an iterative process. But wait, there's more. With this iterative process came prescriptive modeling. So it's a predictive model, it has predictive accuracy, and it adapts to different races, different marathons, half marathons, the 8K Shamrock Shuffle, which happened this past March. And we found that we also have prescriptive capability. And I don't think there's a better quote that says it than from the executive director of the Houston Marathon, who told us just how useful this is for them in planning and executing their marathon. And for him, it was egress metering. For us, that's start line metering. How are runners entering onto the course from the start line? So what we're looking at here is the time of day during the race. So it starts at 7:30 a.m. through 3:30 p.m. And on the y-axis, we see runner densities. So the number of runners we expect to be at how many mile markers. And so you can see this is segmented by where we see them on course. And at the start line, there's a distinct three-wave release. So they release corrals in 3 waves at 7:30 a.m., 8 a.m., and 8:35. And they start at those peaks. And as you progress through course, they kind of start to level out. You see at mile 8, you still see your peaks. Mile 13, they're flattening. But when you get to the finish line, they're actually stretched across a 5-hour window of when runners are finishing their race and finishing their marathon. So it started as an hour and a half starting interval, ended up being a 5-hour interval. And we can simulate this and simulate different start line techniques so they can say, hey, maybe we do a 2-wave system, maybe we do a 3-wave system, see how our runners are going to approach the finish line, but also different mile markers on course where we know certain aid stations are and how to plan for them. So it started as a predictive tool, ended up being a prescriptive tool that helped them develop and evaluate their operational strategies moving forward. So now I'm going to hand it back to Karen as we look before we can actually see SAFE in action.
Great, thank you so much. So as promised, we are going to show you the 2017 marathon in 2 minutes. So what I want you to do is I want you to pretend you're in forward command. You can be Chicago Police, Chicago Fire, you can be the race organizers, sometimes Rom Emanuel comes by if someone wants to be Rom. Let me tell you what you're going to look at. So this is 28 minutes before the marathon, so there are no runners yet on course. But you're going to see this simulation that Chris described. So you're going to see the density of runners per mile down here. The dotted line is predicted in 30 minutes, which is why you do see some runners there. And then you'll start to see the true runners. You're going to see the densities displayed in color on the map. The other thing you'll see on the map is you're going to see we have GPS units on the pacers, so we pick some key pacers to follow. You're also going to see GPS units on bike teams that are following key runners, so the lead wheelchairs, the lead runners themselves. You're going to see on the top is the event alert status. So yellow indicates that this is above, green is ideal conditions. Conditions were slightly elevated because of the temperature. So keep a look at the temperature. It is going to go up into the 70s as the race goes on. You'll see some key statistics on runners, on medical. MPTS stands for the Medical Patient Tracking System. That's the electronic medical record system that's used. It is not deployed everywhere, so the numbers you see will not go up to 2,000 for that reason. You will see live what's happening at the main tents. These are at the finish line, so they should not be busy for the next couple of hours, but they will get busy. And at the aid stations themselves, there is a proxy for medical load, which is stress level. And I can talk a little bit about some of the analytics we've done on the accuracy of stress level. With that, I want to get started. So the marathon is still about 20 minutes away. It's going to go pretty quickly, not the 9 hours that we spend in forward command. So now you can see the wheelchair race has started. You can start to see them go. You can also see the elite runners have started. They are populating the course. You can see that the aid stations are now coming online. So one of the things that we do from an operational perspective is we talk about course conditions. So aid stations are coming online. You're going to see those waves that Chris talked about, which is really neat. You're going to see 3 waves at the start, and then over time you're going to see that flatten out. You're going to see how the runners are entering the course. Gabe is always out at the start line, so he's reporting back to us. So now we're starting to see someone's about to win. So you can see that someone won the wheelchair race. Tatiana McFadden will win the women's race. We always fangirl her because she's fantastic. You're seeing the runners straighten out, flatten out. T is the turtle. So turtle is the end of the official race. That doesn't mean there aren't runners behind the turtle, which is not an actual turtle. I have a great story about that. But what the turtle is used for is when we can start opening streets again. So as I said, streets and sanitation, public works of the city are in forward command. So they're following when roads can be opened based on when the turtle has passed and when aid stations are closed. So you can also see that some aid stations have closed. You can see that the race is flattening out. Runners are starting to finish the race. And so you can see that we're starting to see some increase in the medical facility. So this is what our system does during the marathon. This is, for those of you who were at Informs last fall, this is the GRB. This is the incident command facility for the Houston Marathon. And I think what's interesting in the Houston Marathon is to think about how the system is changing behavior, where people are physically. So John Cianca is the medical director of the Houston Marathon. And what he has said is that SAFE has allowed him to stay in one place during the marathon. Wade Moorhead, who you heard from earlier, says that SAFE allows him to be out on course, and he will call us to see where runners are. So it's been really neat. It's been an amazing 5+ years. I want to thank all of the team, from the team that started the system to the team that worked in Houston. The team just kept growing. Here is the team that you see with their wonderful system. And finally, it wouldn't be a team without a coach, so we want to thank Lana for coaching us for this award competition. We want to thank the National Science Foundation and Northwestern University for their generous support of this work, and all of our partners in Chicago and in Houston. And so with that, I think we finished exactly on time. So, because we're marathon runners, we time things. So happy to answer any questions.